Welcome to Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. For over 10 years, we've produced weekly episodes featuring epic tales of tech support and troubleshooting, discussions about managing our clients and businesses, and interviews with colleagues and vendors. For our pro listeners, we offer Patreon-exclusive shows. This private podcast feed is tailor-made for IT professionals looking for advice and guidance on the more challenging aspects of running your practice, working with your clients and employees, and managing your fleets of devices. For a modest monthly contribution, you'll unlock a world of deeper Apple expertise, meaningful connections, and a shared passion for Apple technology. Simply visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. And now on to the show. We'd like to welcome a very special guest, Adam Engst of the TidBITS Content Network, back to Command Control Power. Welcome back, Adam.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me.
So, well, you come up frequently on this show. I think it's fair to say we talk about TidBITS Content Network fairly often. And, that's because you've got some great content and it comes out on a fairly regular basis. So there's always a lot to talk about. And this came up for me very recently when I put together my Catalina warning newsletter. Apple would love for that to be a Catalina marketing newsletter, like an excitement around Catalina newsletter. But for me, I think I used the subject line, something like, Catalina is here, let the bug swatting begin, just to kind of set the stage for my clients and make sure they understood where we were coming from. But yeah, our advice was consistent with what you put out in your recommendations in your newsletter. And it was to just hold off, like per usual, 2 to 3 months at least, and probably get in touch with us in early 2020. I thought that was good advice.
Yeah, historically we've said, wait till at least 0.1 or 0.2, let them get some of the bugs fixed. But this time, not even so much the Catalina itself, but just this entire swath of releases, iOS 13, iPadOS 13, watchOS 6, tvOS 13. We haven't even seen iOS for HomePod yet. I mean, they're not even there yet. These releases have just been so troubled that, I can't recommend people jump early. And, iOS 13 and iPadOS 13, less problematic. But with Catalina, for so many people, it's your business. You just have to have it work. And when you hear things like the Apple Mail bugs we're hearing about, oh, goodness. Yeah, that's scary. I mean, the Apple Mail bugs, when you hear about any potential for data loss, is one thing that just should really not happen. I mean, you would, strive to have, never have a bug that could possibly result in data loss, especially from a first party like Apple. But, when you have a potential for data loss like that, and it's, furthermore, possibly silent data loss. I don't like the concept of, maybe some of your email's missing, maybe you'll figure it out one day. Maybe you just have this general sense that I really can't find messages anymore and I'm not sure where they are. And what's your recourse at that point? Maybe it's 2 years from now, and you remember back to the Catalina mail bug, in your mind. And it's just, what a scary thing. Well, and especially in this case, because I've been doing this for a long time. I've tested every operating system release since who knows from whenever. And I'm usually pretty okay with crashing and things like that because I save often, I make backups, all those kinds of things. But mail is particularly pernicious because you've got the server involved. That's the truth. And so if corruption happens locally during a Mojave to Catalina upgrade, say, or there seem to be some issues with transferring messages between mailboxes, and you don't notice, and they're uploaded to the server, suddenly your server is corrupted too. And you could even say, well, I've got backups. Yeah, but backing up mail is not quite so simple as all that. Because again, you've got to, kind of figure out whose truth with the server. So if you have uploaded the corruption to the server and then you restore from backup locally, if Time Machine will even let you get everything properly, then whose truth? Does the corruption just come back? I don't know, but it's not a thing I want to test, let me tell you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, when you've got a server involved, you could potentially have a cascading issue where you corrupt the database in one location or lose some mail and it uploads, and then, pretty soon that data loss spreads throughout your machines. And like you said too, the idea of backing up mail, especially if it's Like, I mean, if you open mail one day and nothing's there, that's one thing. I mean, you could, probably revert back to like the database the way it was, or just like reconfigure your account and let it download everything in a worst case scenario. But if there's just random missing messages and you have no way of knowing where those messages are missing from, it's really hard to, even if you knew where they were, it would be a lot of manual labor to restore your database. And we're talking about like us technical people. Any old end user upgrading to Catalina really it's exactly, there's no hope, and it's irresponsible for a bug like that to really get past QA. I mean, that's like a pre-alpha bug, it should not be in a shipping release.
I thought it was interesting. We just actually published on our other site on TidBITS, we published an article from a former Apple engineer, someone who had been at Apple for 18 years, and he was sort of explaining the underlying tensions within Apple that cause these kinds of problems to occur. And one of the things he said is that Apple is really good at fixing crashes, because every crash report is reported to Apple, goes back to Apple, and they get a stack trace. And as soon as the stack traces they see enough of them, they can say, "Oh, that's a bug." They can just go right back in and figure out where it is and fix it. But these non-crashing problems are devilish. That's where you get the real problems.
Yeah, it makes sense. That was a great article. It was linked from Daring Fireball. Maybe some of our listeners have already seen it, but if you haven't seen it, it's on tidbits.com, and the article is 6 Reasons Why iOS 13 and Catalina Are So Buggy, and it's by David Shayer, published a couple days ago, October 21st, 2019. And it does a really good job of explaining a little bit about, the behind the scenes of how this kind of thing can happen and what the priorities are at a company like Apple, and how those priorities result in this kind of buggy release. I mean, the bottom line is you just can't fix everything, and you can't have everything working perfectly if you're also, meanwhile, introducing new features. You're trying to hit a target release date, and there's really not a lot of room for that to shift, especially when, in the case of the iPhone, you're releasing new hardware, and, the shareholders would be up in arms if like a new iPhone didn't come out, at the agreed upon time.
Yes.
So they're really trying to please their stakeholders, and so they're trying to keep to those, to those schedules, and therefore the software has to be ready as well. And then the same thing on the Mac side, maybe to a lesser degree, but of course, I think probably the Catalina releases tie somewhat into things like the new MacBook Pro 16-inch and the forthcoming Mac Pro and so on. And so you kind of need to stay on some kind of release schedule. And so there's only so much time and things don't get fixed. And so what's the answer? I mean, I would say like another no new features release. Like I think the last one was when Steve Jobs got on stage and announced no new features, and that was the feature,
Well, Apple had been doing the so-called TikTok releases. So we had Lion and Mountain Lion, Leopard and Snow Leopard, and then Sierra and High Sierra. But Mojave and Catalina should have been a talk release, and obviously not so much. It has some really big architectural changes. I will say, I think the problem with Catalina and the Mac is actually not so much that it's tied to hardware, because Apple's Mac hardware releases tend to come out a little randomly. We actually usually don't know when that's going to come. Mac Pro, all they've said is by the end of the year. And we know it's coming soon because we're actually starting to see support for it in release notes of Apple's professional apps. So like Final Cut Pro and everything, they're talking exactly about what they're doing for the Mac Pro. But what I think we're seeing much more with that, and David Shayer talks about this in the article, is the complexity of our modern Apple ecosystem has grown exponentially. That we've got features between Catalina and iOS 13 and iPadOS 13 that have to be all tied together. And suddenly, one drives the next one. So, that iPhone drives iOS 13, and that drives iPadOS 13, and that drives Catalina and watchOS 6. And, tvOS 13 is probably the only one that really doesn't matter in some ways.
Right. Right. Other than maybe some apps and certainly like, other content deals and things like that may be related across, across ecosystems.
Right. Forgot about those. That's probably, you're absolutely right. Apple Arcade. That's that drove it the whole way. Never mind.
Right. So you end up, you're right. I mean, all this stuff is so tied together. I can't even imagine trying to sort this out on the side of the people who are leading these different teams, coordinating across hardware platforms and things. There's just so many dependencies. And so it's impossible impossible really for them to have a perfect release cycle. But this is probably an example that's pretty extreme in the wrong direction of, it just doesn't look good for them. I mean, I guess I shouldn't complain because it generates work for us. It seems like it could go a lot more smoothly.
It's an interesting question because obviously you're going to deal with many more people in kind of the business world that I am. If I were kind of managing a large group of Macs, I would just be like, don't touch it. Just don't touch it.
Right.
Probably more like, 6 months even than 3 months because, there's so many things that need to settle down. And so, when you start, kind of throwing all these balls in the air, as I was saying before, my parents stopped over earlier today with their latest crop of questions and they weren't doing anything wrong. It was just inscrutable weirdnesses. I'm like,
right.
Yeah, that happens. Bluetooth sucks sometime. With consumers, at least, they're not quite, living and dying by it from a business standpoint.
Right, exactly. Yeah, well, I told the story last week or the week before of actually a business client who did upgrade on day zero. Who in their right mind is going to do that? And it's not even like something was wrong or he needed new features. It was on like some end user's machine. What are you thinking? Like, this is a production machine. This person is now not only like, are they, when the bugs happen, are they not going to be able to be productive? But like, why are you doing this in the middle of a workday anyway, even if all goes according to plan, So the client that I mentioned, not only like originally went to 10.14.0 for some reason, he got the email from me saying, hey, don't do that. Either didn't see it or ignored it and then went to 10.15. Like, what the heck? While we're at it, let's just upgrade to every 0.0 release we can find. And so that was a prompt for us to re-engage on this topic of we've made, these 3 major recommendations to you about your network hardware that's outdated, your fact that you have no backups, and, we really need to get you in some kind of management if you want a better experience here and if we're going to be able to support you going forward. And I took a little bit of flack for maybe not being strict enough with this client who continued to just, ignore our warnings and things and get himself into trouble and then expect us to bail him out. And I did use it as kind of an opportunity to circle back to those recommendations and apply a little more pressure. And I said, look, we'll help you through this situation. We're either going to upgrade this machine to a compatible version of Office and then hope for the best with everything else, or back up and erase and restore to an older version of the OS, and then, put you back where you were, but you're going to spend a couple hours of time on it. So we'll help you with that. And then any of these other recommendations going forward, in general, we need you on our managed services plan. And I said, I'll give you a discount. If you prepay for the year, I'll cut you a good deal. And then we'll both reevaluate it in a year and see how this is working for us. That's what I did. And he wrote back after a day or two and said, yeah, let's do it. Let's go for it. So
excellent.
We got him on board. So that was okay. But it was a little bit of friction there for a little while.
Well, it does feel to me, in a situation like that in particular, where kind of the difference between, an advisor and, and a partner.
Sure.
The advisor you might go to after the fact and say, hey, what did you think about this thing I did? And you're like, that's a problem. Right. Whereas the partner, hopefully they come to you in advance and say, we're thinking about doing this, and giving you the chance to say, no, don't do that. And here's why. Obviously not doing this willy-nilly. There's very, very good reasons to hold. And it sounds like, if they jumped 2 operating systems and weren't even aware of their application compatibility, that's a perfect reason to why they shouldn't, in fact, be in charge of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. If that didn't prove it, we had given him preemptive warnings and all this stuff. Like, we really need you to get up to date with your Office version and be consistent across the board. And we really need all the OS versions to be consistent. And also, by the way, don't upgrade, and all this stuff. And so, and some clients are just like this. And hopefully he's beginning to see the light, and we'll see how this goes over the long term. But it's interesting to be on this side of things with an OS release because it does generate business. It's a good reason for me to send out a newsletter to give our advice proactively. And again, as I mentioned, all that content that I send out in this newsletter is part of the TidBITS content network. I literally copied and pasted from your write-up and just kind of summarized it a little bit more cleanly for my clients, like shorter outline of the reasons why. And I'm hoping like they just read 32-bit, what? Oh God, read only, oh no. Notarized, yikes, and they just see these keywords and kind of like get the fact that this is not something they want to touch at this point. But But, then we hear back from them on all kinds of topics. They'll write back and say, hey, I think you told me to upgrade Office. Can I schedule some time to do that? Or they'll just write back on all kinds of topics. So it's a great time to be in touch with your clients also.
Right. I mean, I said, you sort of hate this because you don't want to be fear-mongering in any way. You want this to all be happy. But in these cases where you are doing people a tremendous service by saying, here is the cautious path forward. And here's why, and we're more than happy to help you along the way, but let's wait a little bit. That
Right.
Anything like that, it makes you look great because you're the one who's saying, I'm looking out for your best interests beyond anything else. Apple's approach, of course, is you should upgrade immediately. As soon as it pops up in software update, click the button, man. And so, having you provide counter advice to Apple, actually, I think, sort of says, look, we're on your side more so than anything else.
Right. It's a really careful kind of line to walk because, we don't want to be, like you said, a fearmonger. And also we do want to show that we're kind of hip to, these new features that are exciting and are interesting. And, people in real life do want to take advantage of some of these new features and things like that. But you're right. I mean, it is counter to what probably a lot of clients might assume, like, okay, everybody's, pushing out their marketing on Catalina, just another excuse for them to have me hire them for an hour to come and install this. Mm-hmm. And we're saying the opposite, like, don't do that, don't do anything and you won't have to pay us anything right now. And then let's talk in a couple months. I think that does earn a little bit of trust to send that sort of preemptively, and I even said as part of this, newsletter, get a Catalina pre-check. We will pre-qualify you. It's just a good excuse to install Watchman monitoring on their machine. So we can look at it and say, you don't have enough memory or you're going to need a new machine soon anyway, or whatever advice we can give them. But I'm curious, right. Jerry, did you send out any newsletter about Catalina warning clients one way or the other? Or how do you handle this kind of general thing with a new OS release?
I did. I got the article that was released to the TidBITS content network telling you to hang on. We recommend that you don't upgrade. And I sent that out either the night before Catalina dropped or the day of. There's so many different things that play into the psychologies of your client, just human nature, where we're kind of telling them, this is really good, but don't look over here. It's human nature to go ahead and do what you're telling them not to do. It's like, telling your little kid not to touch the stove. And what does the kid do?
You'll get a marshmallow. Yeah, right.
Exactly. There's some of that danger there. There's some of that human psychology that you have to kind of work against. And like Adam said, it's all in the pitch. Coming over here, I joined you guys a bit late. I was listening to Chris Sacca, one of the great angel investors from the West Coast. He was talking about that. It's all how you pitch it. So you got to really frame it in a way that you're taking care of them. Well, it's not like you're telling them to wear a motorcycle helmet. If you don't have a helmet on and you crash, you might hurt yourself. You got to put it to them in a way where you're providing this end-to-end support and you want them to have the best experience they can on the computer. And it's really hard because Apple pushes against that. And Apple's telling them, look over here, we've got some great stuff. And we're telling them, no, don't look.
There's one feature of Catalina, which I think that people could actually use in an interesting way, which is the new voice control features. For if you have users who have accessibility challenges, particularly mobility, hands-to-hand stuff, voice control is truly astonishing. And given that Nuance ditched, what do they call it, Dragon Professional Individual for Mac last year, those people were out of luck. If you were to have a client who that would be appropriate for, that would be a case where you could say, hey, we're going to do this slowly and carefully, but this feature actually could change your life. And that gives you sort of the best of both worlds of, we're not just looking out for you, we're going to show you exactly why you should upgrade in this one particular instance.
It is a good point. There are certain reasons why you might want to, prioritize certain users who go in eyes wide open, understanding that this is like practically a beta. You might as well call it a public beta on the 0.0, anymore, I think, especially now. But, they may be willing to take that walk with you and to go through that process of really carefully and deliberately going through it and being a little bit of a beta tester to take advantage of some of the new features. And on the other hand, the risk with all of this, if you're overly cautious, is that people do see the marketing from Apple and think, oh, you're trying to insert yourself in the middle where, like, you know, you have to be involved as my, like, quote unquote consultant, you know, to like walk me through clicking a button. Like, what's really going to happen here? So it's the classic conundrum where you almost want to like call their bluff or something and say like, yeah, all right, well, just like try it then and see what happens. You know, you'll be in touch sooner or later, you know, because you want to kind of prove to them that it's not as easy as maybe Apple's making it seem. I guess I would say like it's not for everybody, definitely, but it's also maybe not for nobody. I mean, maybe there is a certain market where it is time to say like, let's give this a try.
Well, and a lot of people do have those secondary computers also. You know, that you have the one that you rely on, but, you know, you have a laptop, an older laptop that you travel with that's still capable of using Catalina. And you know, I'm running on a 2012 MacBook Air, and it runs pretty well, honestly. I, you know, haven't felt like it's been a problem. And so, you know, that's where you can, if you have that person who's champing at the bit, you know, it's like, hey, maybe we'll install it over here, as long as you want to be careful of the eating mail bug. That would be the one time, like if you rely on mail, really not so much. But if you're using Outlook or Gmail or something like that, then, you know, then I don't think there's any situations where Catalina is going to cause problems other than that, that would be catastrophic.
Yeah, other than your mail, you know, being just disappearing, like, you know, no big deal. And it was like last time around with Mojave. It was like, oh, wait, you don't use Gmail, do you? Like, yeah, you can't use Gmail. Like, your Gmail account's not going to work. What are you, crazy? Till the 0.1 or 0.2, I forget when they fixed that, but it's almost absurd with some of this stuff that just doesn't work. But, you know, at the same time, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, I think, you know, I have to cut Apple a little bit of slack because there aren't too many companies. I don't think there's a single other company who is dealing with the same sort of breadth and depth of various platform architectures and devices, form factors.
Apple has bitten off such a huge chunk here. I mean, the closest probably is Google, but Google takes a very different upgrade approach, which is like Chrome OS every 6 weeks. Boom, you get an upgrade. You don't get a choice. It just happens. It's silent in the background. But it's also not, they're not trying to do big marquee features. So things don't really change in a big way. And so, you know, it's a very different mentality towards upgrades. You know, I don't know. I mean, I see it both ways. On the one hand, you want to make the big marketing splash. You want to say, hey, look at me. But on other cases, like, wouldn't it be nice if it just all stayed up to date without you having to think about it and, you know, and didn't cause all these problems? So,
well, I mean, I think in the future, there may be room for some kind of release cycle where as an end user, you can literally just click a 1, 2, or 3, you know, or like, you know, red, green, yellow, or something like that, where it's like, do you want to be on the latest cutting edge release cycle? Yeah. You sign your life away and, you know, you're a beta tester and, you know, we all thank you for that service you're performing. The orange circle, you know, would be something like get the releases after they've gone through that first level of testing. They haven't been pulled after, you know, 2 weeks or a month or something. Then they go out to those people. And then finally, when they're like fully vetted and tested, you know, you'd be on the little green dot. And that means, you know, you wait until it's like fully tested. There are some companies that do this with like an insider track or a beta track or whatever. And that can be nice to, you know, to be able to get that feature that's fixing that one bug that you've been suffering from, you know, a little bit ahead of time and do that testing. But yeah, I mean, as far as the masses go, I feel like Apple's maybe a little too, you know, they need to get a little more finely grained with this because, I mean, I have clients who get on the public beta. That's just insanity, you know, and that's like officially don't even call us when you have an issue. But let alone like the 0.0 is kind of like almost closer to a beta than to like what I'd consider a release. So I feel like they need kind of a middle ground where that would be the public beta that you'd have to opt into. And then the 0.1 is really more like the public release.
It really does feel as though, I mean, this is the role the consultants are playing by saying, you know, hey, wait till 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, wait till 2020. Apple could do that as well. I mean, it did not take Apple very long at all before Software Updated started pushing Catalina. They could have released it, a soft launch, wait a little bit, and then maybe you don't have to do things like have the Catalina supplemental update that comes out, you know, a week later.
Right. it does seem like they could, given the fact that this stuff is going to change up until the last second, maybe they need to adjust their release methodology a little bit accordingly. Turning to our, I think, a new corner, the Bozo Client Corner. Jerry, do you have any of these Bozo clients who on, day zero upgraded to Catalina? Did you have any billable work result from this OS release so far?
Surprisingly, I thought there would be a lot more fallout. I would love to think that it was due to the newsletter drop that I did with the information supplied by TCN, but I saw a little uptick in the clicks on those articles. The percentage rate spiked a little bit, but not dramatically. So I don't think a lot of my clients heeded the warning, but at the same time, I didn't get much fallout from it. I'm still waiting. I'm surprised that it's not as bad as it could be.
Now, does Watchman tell you what percentage of your clients have Catalina?
You could go through and you could run a report to find that out. We do use, for our management software, we're using Adigy here. And of course, we're blocking all Catalina installations. And we do get notifications when a client attempts to download Catalina. So that's really speaks well to Adigy and the fact that, we're able to keep our premier clients under control. But I thought I would get just a lot more random pushback from just people finding us on Google and calling up in a frenzy.
It is possible that the just general media coverage, at least in the tech media, of iOS 13 and iPadOS 13 and Catalina was, I don't want to say negative exactly, but was cautious enough. There was people were like, oh, this is confusing. People they're changing their dates. They're doing these staggered releases. All these things that that sense may have seeped out into the larger community.
Yeah, it's a good point. I bet it has. I've definitely read some of those articles in various places. It was no secret that this release was not without its share of problems, more than usual even. But I wonder sometimes with the general end user, do they just get this sort of Apple News fatigue where, I feel like every time Apple releases hardware, no matter how great it is, I get emails from people saying, oh man, what do you think about that new iPhone? Pretty bad, right? And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is the greatest thing. It's like a miracle of technology. Oh, I heard it had a lot of bugs. I'm like, just send me the article. I don't even know what you're talking about. There's always some corner of the internet with all this negative stuff about Apple. It's just that's always going to be there. So I wonder how people interpret some of this real negative stuff. It's like the boy who cried wolf scenario.
As you said, it generates business, generates interest. We see it across our business as well because people, they hear about these things just randomly. They want to learn more. They come, they read what we're writing. They read what, all you folks are posting. And that's all good. That's what we want to have happen.
Because the alternative is to do nothing, to just react as these things come in. We talked about this before in the show, but I think it really deserves bringing up again. Once you have these posts and you could send them out in a newsletter, but it's great to everything that goes in the newsletter hits our blog. I feel great about referring people to articles that we posted now. You want to know about Catalina? Should you upgrade? Take a look at this. This is what we said. And all of a sudden you've got this track record of reporting the news. Now, you can't make them read it, but at least you can let them know that, hey, we were responsible months ago and we told you about this. If you don't go here, you can come here for free and you can get our newsletter for free.
And in some ways, that's the utility of, maintaining that blog rather than, having to be people feeling like they have to call you. Feeling like they should call you, but not wanting to because, oh, is it really worth it? Do I need to, have this expense and everything? Come to the site and they can just get the answer and okay, good. I know what to do now. And because a lot of it is just making people feel comfortable. And I think there's a lot of anxiety in the modern world, probably more so than ever in the past, for lots and lots of different reasons. The more we can do to set people's minds at ease about the things we at least can control, I think the better off we are.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not only good, to have that as a way to point to when somebody does maybe stumble into some trouble, or they didn't take your advice, you do have that to point to. But you can also, when they ask you, because I do get these clients, even if they didn't see our newsletter, they might reach out and ask us, what do we think? Should we upgrade? And rather than having to rewrite that email every time, I can point them to that article that's already written and to say, these are the reasons, because it's not just a yes or no. It's not like, just no, just run away, don't do it. It's helpful to actually have have the reasons why, and I don't want to be rehashing that every time somebody asks me. So it is really great to have that reference.
I firmly believe that the greatest technology of the last 50 years is copy and paste.
That and search, between
yeah, right.
Spotlight when it works and copy and paste. So.
We are professionals. we can search and copy and paste.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how good are your Google skills? That's like a prerequisite for doing this line of work.
Oh,
too.
Goodness.
Keyboard maestro is pretty key too. Like to be able to do the copy and paste, shuffle without using a mouse or trackpad. That's like an expert level skill right there.
And if you're speaking of Keyboard Maestro, you could have the copyright or the clipboard history and just store it in there, and then you pull it up. I get things out of clipboard history that I used, a day or two ago all the time. It's great.
Yeah. Circling back to one of your observations just a moment ago, Adam, where you talked about people are feeling a lot more stress and a lot of anxiety, that actually might be a good way to kind of pepper these articles. Instead of having the person fearful that some hacker with a hood is going to dive into their computer, the message sometimes can be spun a slightly different way. Well, this is what you can do so that, you can feel better about browsing safely or being on the internet in a safe way.
Yeah, and we try to do that. I'm not big on fear as a motivator. I figure that the world is doing that pretty well for me.
Right.
So a lot of the time it's, what I find actually is that realistically, a lot of people go through the same kinds of things. And so one of my goals when writing these things and trying to pick a point of view is that we're all experiencing this. That we've all had this situation where, and then go on from there because it's really true. There is no one has unique experiences on computers anymore. We've all done it, and so I think that makes people feel better because there is still that fear of like, will I break it? Have I done something horribly wrong? I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, it's okay. We've all felt that. Here's what you need to know. And I think that's the best approach.
We often get that question sometimes from clients asking things that they can do to improve their computer. More often than not is, do I have too many icons on my desktop? So I want you to write an article specifically about that, Adam.
Yes, you do. Next tag. No.
Right, exactly.
And actually, that used to be an issue. See, that there's a slight bit of truth to that. Like a 10.2, 10.3, I forget. The number of icons on the desktop specifically impacted the amount of memory the Finder was using. And so you could actually, if you had, hundreds and hundreds of icons in your desktop, you could actually have problems with the Finder because of it, if I'm remembering correctly.
Didn't it have to do with the rendering of the icon itself, and it was taxing the graphics too hard or something along those lines?
The icon preview was treated as if it were like a window. So the same,
that's right.
There you go.
Up, any number of windows in the Finder, like for each icon, it was like you had a new window open. I don't know. I mean, maybe that was just an analogy. I'm not sure if that was like technically true, but yeah, essentially, maybe that was an inefficiency in the way the process was designed when they first added, icon previews. But yeah, I mean it's just amazing how this stuff has legs. Like that kind of thing goes around, people hear it and they repeat it. There may be a kernel of truth somewhere back when, but it's also like not a bad idea to just clean it up. That's what I tell people is like, well, look, these days that's not necessarily the thing that's bogging down your system. Like it's not the worst offender, but for your own efficiency, it might be a good idea to go through and clean it up.
Just last week, I was on the plane to MacTech conference, and the guy sitting next to me is busy force quitting every app on his iPhone as soon as he finishes using it.
Oh, I was just thinking of that. Right.
And I was like, can I make a recommendation? And he listened to me. I felt so good. I was like, it was just killing me watching him. He actually had two iPhones too, and he was doing it on both of them. And some of this is just, again, you're like, okay, this is an urban myth. It doesn't help. It actually makes things worse. Here's why.
How does it make things worse? I should know this.
iOS manages all background apps. And so if you force quit an app, iOS has to launch it from scratch, which takes more CPU power and thus more battery power, slowing down the iPhone, rather than just switching to it. A cold launch is the hardest thing iOS has to do. and a
This
soft.
is why I subscribe.
We've written about this in the past. Maybe it was a little too long ago. I'll have to find that one, pull it back out again, and repost it. Because that's a great little article, and it's amazing how often I see people in public doing this. So I don't know how that got into the zeitgeist.
Apple geniuses will tell you that. I don't know if that's still going on. I feel like Apple probably had an intervention at some point to stop that. But I've heard from a lot of people saying that's what the Apple Store told me. Especially when I see my family doing it, I'm like, oh man, this is possible to counter this trend. But it makes me think of a couple things. One is people think when they are stopped at a stoplight, just turn the car off, turn off the engine because you're sitting there wasting fuel and whatever else. And it used to be that actually that's counterproductive because if you have to start your car up again from a cold start, you're using more fuel and it's just wear and tear and whatever else. And now of course, these days you have a lot of cars that are designed to actually stop their engine. But just like iOS, it'll manage that process for you. You don't have to decide how long am I sitting here? Should I turn off the engine? The car just does it for you. It does the right thing. So it's kind of like just defer to technology.
Precisely.
It'll do the right thing. The other thing that occurs to me is like people always want something to do to feel productive, like to feel like they're doing something to help their phone or, whatever. Yeah. And if you can give them some fiddly little thing that will have some productive effect, I mean, there's millions of iPhones out there. If we gave somebody something productive to do and one of these memes went around where everybody just thinks this is the right thing to do. Back in the day, there was the SETI screensaver. You want to have a screensaver on your screen? Fine. You might as well make it the SETI screensaver and maybe you'll help find intelligent life on another planet. Maybe we need something like that for the iPhone, equivalent to quitting apps, but something useful.
Well, guys, it's been great, but I need to turn into a pumpkin.
It's great to have you on. We don't have you on often enough. We got to have you as a regular attendee.
I always enjoy getting to talk about this stuff. And honestly, I do a lot of podcasts that are consumer focused, so it's nice to talk to the higher end folks doing the consulting too, and really get more of that. And that's why I listen to the podcast, honestly, because you guys are dealing with more significant problems and frankly, what's happening in the real world. Until next time, I will look forward to listening to the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us, Adam. Much appreciated. And listeners, check Adam out at TidBITS Content Network. That's tcn.tidbits.com. Thanks, Adam. So it was really nice to talk to Adam, and he's got his finger on the pulse of the consulting community, I think, in a really good way. By the same measure, I think we do in our day-to-day role, in the way we work with clients on a daily basis, we oftentimes come across new ideas, new ways of thinking, and maybe new angles and new approaches and business models, or even new business possibilities by working with clients. And Jerry, you were talking about a possible business opportunity that occurred to you recently, kind of touching on the idea we just talked about with Adam there, the everyday anxiety that I think a lot of people have in society now, and how maybe there's an angle to profit off of that anxiety somehow. Was that the idea?
Yeah, you know me, always looking for an angle to make some more money. I have some elderly clients, and we've all been there where we go out on a call and we sit down with them, and they somehow have gotten some email that they're concerned about that says that their account has been compromised, or we find Mac Keeper and they're getting these little pop-ups saying, your Mac has 12,000 viruses, click here to delouse your Mac. But never a call that was quite like this. And I'll just explain it very briefly. I was contacted by my client's wife, and he's getting on in years. I don't think he's approached his 80s, but he's pretty darn close. If he is, he's in his early 80s. And he was one of those clients who was always a little bit of a challenge because you felt like you'd come back every couple of weeks or every couple of months, and you felt like you're starting over again, like you haven't really made any progress from the last time you were there. He might have taken copious notes. He might have listened to you, and you kind of thought that he got some of these messages, and then you'd come back again and you'd rehash the same set of problems. So this has been going on for a while. And I got a call from his daughter who said that, we'd like to have you come in. You're just going to meet with my mom and I. So I sat down with them a few days later, and they basically said that they were pretty confident that her dad was experiencing some cognitive problems. Recently, they were getting emails stating that passwords were changed for their financial institutions, and come to find out there was nobody actually hacking into their accounts. It was just the dad going in and changing passwords. And then the daughter was concerned that maybe he was entering his social security number in websites that were unsafe. And so there was real deep concern about what they should do. He's always been a heavy computer user. He does a lot of photography. It would be the worst thing in the world to try to say, like, Dad, you can't use the computer anymore. But they were kind of wondering, like, what's going on? Is this computer really compromised? And it wasn't. He just had, malware. MacKeeper was on there, of all things. What a shock. And stuff that was just doing some tracking. So some redirects on the browser history and the browser web pages. And so we fixed all that. I actually recommended to them that I install, and they pay for a subscription to Malwarebytes. And I said, this would do some remediation automatically for you. And so when I do visit you again, whether it's 30 days from now, 60 days from now, we're not going to find all this malware on the computer. Right. But I can assure you that this computer hasn't been compromised. But then they were kind of in a quandary of what to do. And I said, well, I think what you really need to do is you need to transfer the care, custody, and control of any of your premium things that he does on the internet, like control of the credit card, control of the banking, maybe Amazon accounts, and have nothing that would possibly be exposure for you tied to his email address or his phone number. They thought that might be a good solution. So I was thinking about, are there opportunities there to somehow market that? We were talking about like a name like Digital Custodian Service or something like that. We as consultants couldn't potentially take control of a client's financial account. That wouldn't make any sense on a number of different levels. And yes, you could, involve an attorney, but that sounds like that would probably be a business that neither you or I would want to be in. But the other thing that we were talking about the possibility of is, like, what about like offering as one of your packages or services some way to reverse their digital online presence with their financial institutions?
Yeah, these are great angles. I mean, it occurs to me there's a parallel to what parents are asking for a lot of times about their kids. My son's online too often, or I can't get my daughter to go to sleep. She's texting all night. How do you solve that? And a lot of times the answer is not like strictly a technical solution. I mean, there are technical things you can do, but it's also about, the rules you put in place as parents, obviously, and other things like, if the kids are allowed to have all these devices in their room, it's going to be harder for you to avoid them, using the wrong devices at the wrong times, the wrong sites, and whatever else. And similarly, in the case of this kind of scenario, I wonder how much of it can be solved with technology. It's tempting to think, we can have a technical solution to this. Really, part of it is you just need that level of engagement from another family member, or maybe in lieu of a family member, it is up to a service like this kind of digital financial concierge type thing. I mean, it almost seems like it could be a side offering from a financial advisor or, like you said, a lawyer. It's almost like a power of attorney, where they agree to become like a liaison for all things, financial institution related or, credit related or whatever else. You as the technical advisor can help implement the technology part of things. And then you still just need somebody who's going to be able to, to manage that. One simple idea I thought of in relation to that was you could either change the email address of record to, some new email address that's accessible by, say, the daughter in this case, or the wife. Maybe that address is their primary address. You just switch it over. Or maybe it's an address that then forwards to more than one person, so that even if the person, himself, who's maybe suffering a little cognitive decline, does go and do a password reset or change something, at least every email sent to that address of record gets, forwarded over or CC'd automatically to someone else who can keep an eye on things. That would be one simple solution to just like having a level of awareness inside of it.
And it could represent recurring revenue. I know when you and I talked about this offline for about an hour or so. The other thing I'm thinking as you're talking is there are other services out there that do nothing more than what you just described, just doing monitoring. yes, you're part of that email chain, and that just triggers out, something that you could generate in Zendesk. It arrives into your Zendesk ticketing system, and all of a sudden you've got a preformed notification that goes out to the key family members. In this case, the daughter and the wife. Like, we've noticed that we've got this alert, right. And of course they would have received the alert too. But it helps that issue rise to the top. Whereas that might just get buried in their email for the day. All of a sudden now they've gotten your monitoring service is kicking in because it's monitoring a key financial institution that some action has taken place. Are we all aware of this? It says that the numbers have been updated. Who took action on this? Your concern, and it's a justifiable one, was, there's some overhead associated with this. But at the same time, if the client's paying for some sort of a financial digital monitoring where you're just adding that layer in, and you're looping in your company to do this, that's a commodity that's billable and on a recurring basis.
In this kind of scenario, you could have a combination of, you have a service, which really the service is just, we change the email address on file, we change the phone number on file to something that simply forwards to more than one person. And then, like you said, you also as the kind of overseer get a ticket generated from any changes and things as well. So you're also overseeing those emails and phone calls or text messages, and combine that type of service with something like a credit monitoring, even though those are kind of worthless, or like a credit freeze or some kind of package deal where you could just like resell some kind of white labeled service that monitors credit and maybe includes some kind of dark web searching as well. You can package these like, essentially commodity, like off the shelf components together and just sell it, and you teach them how to use it. Because a lot of times, like you said, you get a ticket in your system, they're getting an email, they can respond directly, but they're going to get an email that says, you've updated your thing. And the daughter maybe is wondering, like, what does this mean? What happened here? Can you explain this to me? And all they really need is somebody like you to say, hey, it looks like, as far as I can tell, there was a change made. This was authorized by email. You may want to just check with your dad and make sure that was him, that he did that intentionally. Also get the updated password in your 1Password so that you can just log in and make sure it's all still good. And so you'd be the advisor in those cases. And it seems viable. I just wonder, how much can you make this into a template that's like a repeatable service that you perform? I mean, it would be great, like if it's always Chase Bank, you can navigate their phone tree to a certain extent where you know exactly how to get to that department that lets you make these changes as efficiently as possible and whatever else. That's great. But if you get some kind of curveball scenario where a certain institution is really difficult to work with, that may throw you for a loop on the second or third one that you do. Then it may be harder to make up the money. So it's just a whole new realm, and I'm not sure how to think about those other concerns.
Right. I know we did talk about, as part of the service that you offer, reaching out to the financial institutions. I think we could take that out of the loop and just make it a little bit more basic, where you're just doing the monitoring, you're doing the email monitoring, you're being the financial custodian to make sure that the account isn't going sideways. And you brought up a really good point. You are explaining it in layman's terms to your clients. Someone might listen to you say that and think like, oh, that's overly simplistic. I'm sure everybody would get that. But how many times have you gotten, as a consultant, somebody sending you either a screenshot or an email where it says, I just got this message that it says my phone number and FaceTime have been updated or recently added. Right. What's that? You just updated to iOS 13, and that's not unusual to get that message, Right. The other thing, too, is to just keep it really simple. Can you sign off of Citibank or Bank of America? Can you close down, not the account, obviously, but your digital presence there? And I think it varies from institution to institution, but that's also a solution as well. And that might be a good marketing ploy. Why can't things be like they were in the old days? And you have a picture of your elder client shaking hands with the postman. Things were so simple then. Right. Everybody wants you to go paperless for the environment, and that's a great thing. But I think here, what would be better than trying to roll them back? That's another way to handle it.
Yeah, I got a slogan for you. Make Bank of America great again. it is an interesting angle because I like the cleanliness of that, or the simplicity. Go offline, get offline. Can't we just, I just want a flip phone. I just want a refrigerator without a screen on it. A lot of these clients are kind of like, let's go back to the days before everything had a screen and a computer in it. Let's get off of online banking, and everything would be done. I mean, I don't remember how things were done, but by phone and walking into the bank, and you'd get your paper statement. That clearly should still be an option, and it should even still be an option if you want to revert back to it. I guess my only concerns there would be, how do you deal with the security implications of, social engineering by phone? I mean, somebody calls up and says, hey, we're just checking in on your, did you receive your most recent statement? Great. Or can you read me the numbers at the top left corner? Or so. It's like, I wonder, if that's necessarily safer. But yeah, it's an interesting angle. So, Jerry, let's throw this idea to the listeners and solicit some feedback, because I'm sure there's a lot of people having a stoplight or traffic light moment right now. I think this was a new concept coined by Richard Wingfield in a recent episode, whereas NPR has their driveway moments where you're sitting in your driveway, just listening to the end of a show, riveted, waiting for it to end before you shut off the car and go inside. We have traffic light moments where our listeners yell and shake their fist at the stoplight when we're saying something that they, can't possibly agree with or understand and can't abide. So we would invite you, if you're having one of these traffic stop moments, to get in touch with us and tell us about your experience with elder care and how you take care of clients that may be going through some cognitive decline, and how best to deal with this scenario. And also to widen that question a little bit, do you see any potential in a service offering around this, and maybe even a separate business kind of endeavor or service package that you could potentially offer? Are there any services out there that anybody knows about? Because, there's clearly a need for something like this, and there's a lot of different ways to address it, and there's no right or wrong answers. A lot of it has to do with the individuals in question. So let us know how you've dealt with it before and any ideas you might have about it. And we'd love to hear from you.